Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Books and Books. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're very happy to have you with us. While you are silencing your cell phones, if you could take a moment to remind yourself to go to our website, booksandbooks.com. You can check our calendar of events. That'll give you a synopsis of all the great events we have at Books and Books every night of the week. And as you can see by the lights and cameras, we are live streaming this event this evening on the internet. A lot of them are now live streamed. And while we prefer to have you in the store, you don't need to be. You can always go to the live stream and call the number on your screen below, and we can ask the author a question. She will answer for you during the event, or you can order a book that we will get signed for you and ship it to you anywhere in the United States free of charge. Overseas might be a little bit higher. But tonight we are very happy to have with us Kathryn Hamm and the New Art of Capturing Love. The first guide to posing and sensitively capturing same-sex couples on their big day, The New Art of Capturing Love equips semi-pro and professional wedding photographers to enter the exciting new LGBT wedding photography market. There are exciting times for marriage equality, but capturing memorable LGBTQ portraits requires a novel approach to posing, which until now has been nearly exclusively oriented towards pairing a taller man in black with a smaller woman in white. What works for Jack and Jill won't necessarily work for Jack and Michael, or let alone Jill and Louise. The New Art of Capturing Love shatters the old standards of wedding and engagement photography by showing how inappropriate they can be for today's diverse couples, then shares easy-to-implement poses and techniques that can be applied to any couple or wedding party, no matter their orientations, to create lasting memories. Whether you're a wedding photographer looking to enter this burgeoning market or a gay and lesbian couple looking for visual inspiration, these gorgeous images will both instruct and inspire. Kathryn Hamm is president of GayWeddings.com, the pioneering online wedding boutique and resource for same-sex couples, offering a community forum, planning articles, and the directory of more than 60,000 LGBTQ-friendly wedding pros. She's an education expert for Wedding Wire, the nation's leading marketplace, serving the $70 billion wedding industry, as well as speaker, workshop leader, and consultant for couples and wedding vendors across the country. She lives in Arlington, Virginia. We're very happy to have her with us. Please welcome Kathryn Hamm.
And this book would not be here without the work and inspiration of Thea Dodds, who is a photographer. And I put this photo up mainly so that you can see the companion t-shirt. I'm wearing mine, which says, "I'm not a photographer, but my co-author is." And she wears the one which says, "I'm not gay, but my co-author is." What we have found since writing this book is that people ask me, "How long have you been a photographer?" And people keep asking her about her experience as a gay woman. So this has been our fun way to address this. And so I wanted to put this slide up and also say that this is actually 3 of our talented contributing photographers. We were recently at a book launch in San Francisco in the heart of the Castro, and it was very exciting to be able to celebrate the release of this book there in such an important community for the LGBT community. This book would not be what it is, not only without Thea's inspiration and invitation to do this project with her, but also with our photographers. And this book is very unusual in that we have 48 photographers represented, and it's their work of 72 couples. So there are so many reasons that this book is really different, but one of them is the range and the diversity of couples and family members that we have represented. So we like to start our presentations talking a little bit about how this book came to be. Usually Thea tells a little bit of this story because as the photographer who is based in New England, she has been photographing same-sex couples for a long time. So she photographed her first couple in 2005. And she tells the story about finding that she was struggling a little bit with it. She felt like there were some aspects of it that were a little bit uncomfortable, that she wasn't necessarily catching the couple and it's the essence of their love. That she said, "I felt like I was posing them as friends or siblings." And she wanted to do better, and she spent time looking for education resources, and the photography industry has a ton of it. And she couldn't find anything. So this is what largely led us to sit down and write what was really the first book, was called Capturing Love, and it was a self-published title. And the book was picked up about a year ago when we rewrote and expanded the book to its new version, The New Art of Capturing Love, which Photo Books has published for us. This is the photo that was one that through which Thea and I first met. This is the wedding that she submitted to my website, gayweddings.com, which, as you heard in the intro, is actually a website that actually my straight mom founded back in 1999. So we're the first website of its kind. And as the advent of blogging and weddings and real weddings took hold, we expanded and began to publish real weddings like many of the wedding resources. And so Thea submitted this wedding of these two beautiful young women, and she talks a lot about this red truck, and I found this whole portfolio for these women just absolutely outstanding. And so as a result of our work together publishing that wedding, when it came time to figure out how she might find more resources, largely, and for her, creating a new resource to serve photographers, she contacted me and said, listen, Kathryn, you know, my experience is that weddings are changing. And wedding education or photography education needs to change too. And she's told me all about how photographers learn, about the pose books that they have, about the ways that the industry talks about weddings and who the couples are, and said, you know, I want to do better by my clients, especially by my same-sex clients, but I'm struggling to do so because there are no roadmaps. And I said, I absolutely understand what you're talking about because I see this in a number of vendor categories, and it's part of the sort of work and education that I do. And it felt very important to us to create this book. So we got to talking and created the book, and as you know, have now published it, and we've been talking about it for some time. And one of the things that's exciting for us is that since this is the second iteration on the book, we've had the chance to know how people responded to the first book, to the first images, to the ways that we were talking about it. And one of the questions that we got often, and still do, is how can you say that it's different? Same-sex couples deserve the same rights, and they shouldn't be treated differently. I hear a lot of folks actually who work with same-sex couples say quite often, it's just the same, there aren't any differences. And we would say, actually, there are some subtle differences. Because if you think about, and most everyone I've spoken with at some point has sat, for example, for like a high school portrait, or maybe posed for a prom photo. And you know, that's always where they have you twisted in some angle and you're doing some look. And somehow you see that photo and you know it's you, but you think, I don't know, that's not quite me. I don't really usually ever sit quite like that. This is something that we found that happens in wedding poses. And I'll show you some examples of the traditions or the standards that exist in wedding photography. And what can happen if you plug a same-sex couple into that pose, which has largely been geared for a heterosexual couple, a taller male, a smaller female with the gender roles assigned. It can actually interfere with the result of the picture, of the image of the couple. And so I spent some time learning about photography because I'm not a photographer, as my shirt says. That's what my co-author does. And one of the things I got to do was to look through some of these pose books. And what was amazing was over and over again, so many of the same themes. Who looks at the camera? Who's in a position of some power? What are the poses that couples are put in? And certainly, I never saw any representation of same-sex couples. So when you think about a standard photo, you can think about the photo of the taller man with the woman who puts her hand on his chest. Well, this couple, one of Thea's couples, they know that we are showing this as we speak, and we're kind enough. It was a playful moment, and Thea and the couple were both kind enough to use it for these purposes. But that is, you can imagine that what we would say is some couples can end up looking awkward at best and offensive at worst. And that's when you come out of this plug-and-play method, and it happens all the time, and more than you would expect. And again, the ones when it's just subtle, it just looks like there's a little something missing because the love between the couple isn't necessarily captured. They end up looking like friends or siblings or, I don't know, awkwardly posed. They don't really seem connected, and intimacy isn't always conveyed. So let's talk about some of the standards in wedding photography and some of the photograph sort of must-have shots that happen during a day. And Thea talks a lot about how intense it is when you show up and you're taking a photograph of the dress, because the dress is a big showpiece of the day. And so one of the things, an opportunity that is there for same-sex couples would be being able to photograph 2 gowns, if there are 2 gowns in that case. If you have 2 brides and maybe there's only 1 gown and maybe the other bride is wearing pants, how might you work around that? The bottom line is you can rethink the attire photographs that you're taking because they're going to show up in different combinations. And particularly for grooms, there is no precedent for taking a photograph of men's suits, for example, in a wedding. They might do some cufflink details and so on, but the men are largely forgotten. And that is especially true in straight weddings, where many of the grooms are deleted from the conversation. So I spent a lot of time in the wedding industry talking to folks saying, hey, what about our grooms out there? As last time I checked, there are 2 people that go to the altar, not just 1. Another wedding photograph, and this is from Redstone Photography. These gentlemen were married here in Florida, had their ceremony in Florida, but they were legally married, and that may have been in DC. I can't remember offhand. This is something, a category we pull in the reveal, which is historically, the bride would be revealed to her husband. And so we talk in the book a little bit about double reveals, ways for couples who choose to have one be surprised or both be surprised by what the other looks like as they're dressed for their day. How does that show up? And I find this, well, there are so many reasons why this photo is beautiful and important and poignant. But one of the things that I love about it is what it shows is a lot of intimacy and emotion between 2 men, which is, I think, very difficult to find, particularly in just a very subtle, touching way, as these 2 were revealed to each other before their wedding. The altar is another big topic in weddings. How do couples get down the aisle? Is there even an aisle? There are all sorts of configurations that happen. We love to show this. Not only is it a fantastic photographer based in the Hudson River Valley, but these 2 decided no altar, they're just going to come through in a poof of glitter. So why not? If you're going to do it up. So sometimes there are 2 aisles, and if you are a wedding photographer, you need to make sure that you have a second photographer with you because you can't necessarily capture both couples coming down the aisle if they're proceeding in at the same time. So from a photography standpoint, there are some very practical applications to how photographers need to think and prepare and understand what a couple might be doing for their wedding day. This is one of Thea's favorites. I'm sure I can't do it justice in how she talks about it. But one of the things that we discovered, and I guess on a level I understood, but it really struck home for me watching Thea sort of get this, because she was thinking about it from a mechanical imposing perspective, but recognizing the influence of gender roles, of the expectation of there being a masculine groom and a feminine bride. And even if maybe you had members of the same sex, that somehow it would still be masculine and feminine roles. And beyond that, this is just gorgeously composed. What's amazing about it is it shows 2 men, and we can't see many details about them, but we can see their strength, and we can also see their intimacy. And it's a beautiful, this was actually from an engagement session, but a lovely way that the photographer, Tammy Watson, captured these 2 men and their strength, but in a very quiet, touching way. That clearly shows 2 men, and there isn't precedent in the wedding photography posing guides for how would you capture 2 men in a way that captures them in a natural environment and shows a nice subtle intimacy that's very true and organic. So we refer to this in the book as a dip disaster. This one is actually an example of not being a dip disaster because of the photographer's cleverness. Julian Cans is actually based out of Italy, and he and this couple were kind enough to share a couple of photos with us for this book. In his portfolio, there are a lot of really fun photographs that twist on the expectations of who should be doing what in any photo. So here, our bride in the dress, no less a red dress, is dipping the other bride who is wearing pants. And for same-sex couples, if you look through the albums, all sorts of wedding albums, you always see usually a groom picking up his bride, if that's possible, and a groom dipping his bride. So photographers are looking for a couple of these playful standards that they take during wedding photography sessions on the day of. And if you're asking a couple who may be, not always, but are often of a similar strength and similar build, you may run into some physical challenges beyond how it might feel as the couple to be asked to do something that physically is a little bit difficult. It's not necessarily something you've done before or is something that you're sort of well suited to, but nonetheless, a photographer might ask that of them. So this photographer has done a couple of fun things with it. The first is playing, obviously, with the perception that we apply for the gender roles in the dress and the pants. But the other thing that mechanically was really smart was because this bride is wearing a dress that's a longer gown, her legs are hidden. So she's actually able to get a much wider, more athletic stance in order to be able to dip her beloved. And this is one of my favorites. Jeremy Fraser of Scene 1 Photography captured this. Beautiful wedding photo. We refer to this often talking about how the parts can tell so much more of the story. And I love it because of its resonance to sort of traditional romantic notion of a kiss, but also love that so much of that is happening off screen. And we'll talk about that in a second. But this other component about the play on their attire, which is complementary, but also individual at the same time. So one of the things when we, especially when I talk in the wedding industry to wedding professionals, but this is really true for photographers, is Thea defines it as there are ways to sort of do a shortcut, a symbol of love, which is often a kiss in weddings. Pretty simple stuff. It's a couple getting married, a kiss, that's very easy. But for some men, particularly for gay men who are much older, this is something that's can be very difficult for them. They may not, for example, Thea talks about one wedding where the first time the couple ever kissed in front of their families was actually at the wedding itself. There are many men who, because of the homophobia and the discomfort in our society, for their own safety, they feel very uncomfortable showing any sort of physical intimacy, from holding hands to a kiss. So one of the reasons that we put this beyond it, it's just a beautiful photo, but one of the ways that we talk about it is how this represents, we assume a kiss is happening off screen, and maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But it tells us a lot about the romance. It tells us a little bit about their height. It talks to us a little bit more about a kiss happening somewhere off screen. So I think it's beautiful on a lot of levels. But when we talk about it, we like to introduce this because it's really important for photographers to understand that not all gay male couples are comfortable with physical displays of affection. And as a photographer, it's really important for you to make sure the couple feels comfortable, make sure the couple is willing to be themselves in front of you if you really want to get organic and authentic wedding photos. So wedding parties, and this is really fun to talk about. Those of you that might read the New York Times, you may have seen some recent articles. There was one, for example, on Grandma's Flower Girl. Straight couples are loving to play now with their wedding parties more than ever. I like to think that our LGBT community had something to do with this. But this is a beautiful wedding out of Chicago, quite obviously. Actually, some performers in this group. But what we talk about and we like about this is sort of, number one, the unity that's within the thoughtfulness around the details of their attire. There's also some room for individual expressiveness while it's all unified. But there's also a real mix. We've got a real diverse mix from gender to race, but it's a real blended wedding party. And this is really important because more couples than ever are doing this. But it also is important for photographers to recognize that same-sex couples have an entirely different way of approaching their weddings, and they do it because of what's meaningful to them, not necessarily because the prescription is who will stand on what side. And one of the other details that Thea pointed out that I had missed, which is very uncommon but is really nice here, is if you look at the two gentlemen on the far side from where I'm standing, you'll see they're holding hands. So the photographer has found this nice little way to let this couple be a couple in the wedding party. And she talks about how traditionally, when you're staging a wedding party, there are usually configurations where you'll let the couples sort of leave the bride's side or the groom's side and put them together. So it's just that way of thinking. You've got to let go of the assumption of who the couples are in any wedding party, and are there ways where you can let them express who they are in relation? And so this was one technique that the photographer Ariel Donison used, and it's I think it's just a lovely group photo. And I had to add in, this is one of my favorites, and these guys are based out of Florida, from the Orlando area, actually. This is, I think, such a fun and joyful and delightful photo on so many levels. As we talk about it in the book, what we talk about that's so important is recognizing what's going on in the group and the energy around the ceremony and the friendships involved, and finding those moments to basically kind of get in on the joke. And the story behind this is that one of the bridesmaids And I believe one of the grooms also made their tuxes and the bridesmaids' dresses, for what it's worth, which I just think is incredibly impressive. I hope to meet him someday and talk more about that. They had done the final fitting after she flew into town, and she left her shoes back at that house. And she was still wearing her flip-flops, and they were getting ready for photos, and they have discovered this. So in the book, we refer to this as flip-flop faux pas. Just so fun with the play on how these guys, all pretended to be completely traumatized by it. So it's just a delightful, spontaneous moment that was captured. I just love the joy in that. So a couple of things we'll talk about with this slide. The larger question, why does learning how to better serve LGBTQ couples matter when it comes to serving all couples? Let me take a quick moment just to talk about why we chose to use LGBTQ in the book. It's a long list of acronyms. I will say in general, best practices for you listening at home, same-sex couples is really who we're talking about in this book. But by the same token, we know that the community is a lot more broad, and it includes lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer-identified couples. What it matters for the purposes of this book is talking about same-sex couples. So those who would present as two brides or two grooms. And there's still variation in that, which is part of why we added the Q. And in the book, we have a separate sidebar that talks a little bit about that, and two queer-identified couples who are willing to share their photos with us, because their approach was, why would I be in a book about gay and lesbian wedding photography, because that's not how I identify. So the larger message is that it's really important to understand your couples, understand their language, understand how they identify before you make any presumptions. But know that that is, as brief as I can make it, why we chose to use LGBTQ when talking about the couples in the book or the larger community references. So why does this matter for everybody? When I was in the process of writing this book, the first draft of the book, I spent a lot of time talking with this bride here. She's a neighbor. Our dogs are best friends. We spent a lot of time while the dogs were playing talking about this book. And she said, Kathryn, I have to tell you about this wedding photograph of mine. And she and the photographer were both kind enough to share it with us. In this photo, if you're looking at it, you may first obviously see the bride and sort of your eye goes up the staircase. But then you'll notice that there's a guy in the background. You see the caterer walking by. Is that the groom? Who is this guy? Somebody who's photobombing? You don't know, right? Photobombing being so big now. So it turns out this is actually her best man. He's her bridesman. He is her best friend. She wanted him on her side, but it was a very formal wedding. And so when you've got the formal trappings, what would have happened? What assumptions would be made if he had been placed in his sort of natural order down near the bride? We would have presumed it's the bride and groom. So the photographer and the bride neither were prepared about this. And P.S., she is a straight bride. So this is her bridal party. And they hadn't thought about this. This is a new way that couples are doing this, and this is why we say it's really important not to make assumptions, because you can improve your wedding photography by thinking through some of these elements and being able and prepared to break out of the box. And here's an example of a photographer and a couple that had a different conversation. This is a straight groom, and this is his wedding party, mixed. And the longer you look at it, the more diversity you can see, but by the same token, much like the Chicago photo you saw earlier, there's a lot of lovely connection. There's a lot of lovely unity in this photo. And more straight couples are having blended wedding parties. So it's a great example, a very clear illustrative example from this to understand why rethinking the expectations about gender roles and couples can really matter. So here we are on the cusp of really exciting time. This is a photo that Thea took. These are the first gentlemen to get a legal marriage license in Portland at the stroke of midnight, or 12:01, I think it was. And they were leaving City Hall and coming out, and there were throngs of people there celebrating the moment and taking that picture. And so for photographers, this is an exceptional time. It's a very exciting time, because photographers actually, those that have been working the last few years and will continue to work in the coming year, they will have this outstanding opportunity to capture history in the making. And so we are very proud of this book because of the stories that it tells of the 72 couples through the eyes of and lenses of 48 photographers. Their stories really speak quite loudly. As we head toward what potentially could be full marriage equality in the US within the year, sort of next year, starting in June, depending on what happens legally, it is indeed an incredible time. So I hope that you will support us by purchasing the book here in the store, or if you are watching online tonight, please follow the information on the website here, Books and Books, and support them. I'll be signing books tonight, and and they will ship you one of those signed books. And do we have any questions from the online community?
I haven't seen one yet.
All right. Do you all have any questions? No. Very good. Well, thank you for having me, Steve. I appreciate being hosted by Books and Books. And
Great. Good job.
yeah, thank you.
Thanks, folks, for coming. Also, as I say again, we have the books for sale behind the counter. Kathryn will sign them for you here. If you're watching online, as she stated so eloquently again, we'll have her sign one and ship it to you, no charge. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you.